Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have for you something a bit different today. Thrift Store Horror is my collaborator on the channel. I use them for resources on what to read next and how to get books that I'm missing. And in some cases, I'm tracking down the wrong book entirely because it's the UK release and I already have the United States release. Anyway, recommendation was 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. This is a compilation novel. It's all short stories. I have not read this before, but it came highly recommended by Thrift Store Horror. So we have stories by R.L. Stine, Caroline B. Cooney, Christopher Pike, D.E. Athkins, A. Bates, J. Bennett, Carol Ellis, Diane Ho, Lael Littke, Sinclair Smith, J.B. Stamper, Ellen Emerson White, and Patricia Windsor. Half of these authors have worked with Scholastic and Point Horror in the past. This should be pretty fun. And we all know about R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike, right? Believe it or not, I haven't really read any Diane Ho, or Sinclair Smith, or Caroline B. Cooney, but I do have a Cooney novel in the works, so stay tuned for that. I will be reading one story from this compilation and then publishing that as its own episode. I'm going to use this book like glue. If there's any holes or gaps or weirdness going on in my schedule, I'll be using one of these stories to fill that void. Just something fun to do. So let's begin. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the join button to show your support. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me narrate them a story. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Death's Kiss by D.E. Athkins from 13 Tales of Horror. Oh, gross! That was Delia, emphatically. Everything Delia did was emphatic. You could hear her coming a mile away. You knew her opinions right up front. Ew! Valerie wasn't as empathetic. In fact, Val was practically a disappearing act. Frail, waif-like, big eyes like on those hokey sympathy cards. Only she wasn't frail or waif-like. Not really. No way. That was me, chiming in as always. I'm Elizabeth. My parents named me Elizabeth along with hundreds of other kids from my generation. Dare to be the same. I tried to think of nicknames that might be distinctive, but the other Elizabeths in the school beat me to it long ago. Liz Gregg, she's a cheerleader. Beth Dvorak, she's going to be a model, to pay her way through MIT probably. Eliza? Nah. Betty? I don't think so. So, just Elizabeth. Still, Valerie was rising to consciousness. Her big, big eyes narrowed. We were looking at the new boy, Ken. An unfortunate choice for a name if you ask me. Like Barbie and Ken, you know? But what's in a name? And he did look like a Ken doll might look, if it had come to life. Gorgeous but pale, carved, rugged but somehow delicate features, straight dark brows, perfect black hair, a living doll. Maybe that was how the rumors had started. He definitely had an air about him. He wore dark glasses, long coats that looked somehow from another century. Maybe what a rocker might wear on stage. Hats. He defiantly played to the rumors, and it should have looked phony, but it didn't. At least not to me. I'd die before I'd say it out loud, but I thought he was the most gorgeous guy I'd ever seen. I, Elizabeth Smith, little, plain, pale Elizabeth Smith, had fallen in love. What was it about him? The way he chose to stand out, when I spent my whole life fixated on being normal? The fearless way he was what he was, or what he liked to be, while everyone else moused along, hating whatever was different without thinking, afraid of their own shadows? Whatever it was, whatever he was, I was attracted to him, drawn to him, drowning in love for him, and there was nothing I could do about it, except to talk about him every chance I got, which wasn't hard, not only because of the way he looked and dressed, but because of the rumors. Maybe, whispered Valerie. Delia said, There's no such thing. Okay, Valerie, are you in there? Well? Valerie never lets go once she's got a grip on something. That's the real survival of the fittest for you. Valerie, I said, it's a gag rumor. Yeah, as in to throw up? Delia still hadn't taken her eyes off Ken. A joke, Val, I said, before Val could get caught up in any double meanings. Val smiled her demure, close-lipped little smile, secret as the Mona Lisa's. Wouldn't it be sexy if he were a real live vampire? If he were a real live vampire, it would be life-threatening, snarled Delia, suddenly switching her attention back to Val. Because he would put his teeth into your neck and suck out your blood, and you'd be dead? That got to Val. Gross, she said, her perfect little smile turning into a perfect little pout. And then, proving that she was all there at least some of the time, she added, What's it to you anyway, Delia? Since when were you a vampire expert? Delia blushed, and I was grateful that Val had decided Delia was the competition, not counting every other girl in the school, because, like I said, when Val gets something in her head, there is no stopping her. And I didn't want Val getting anything in her head about me, like me being hopelessly in love with Ken. After all, Barbie might have had the figure for it. I didn't. I just didn't quite fit. I was always on the outside looking in, saying things that were just a little off, trying things that were a little uncool, a barely tolerable sort of person, except that I was a mistress of disguise. So they didn't know I was a gawk, a misfit, a dumb dweeb. They just thought I was average. See what I mean? If I'd been the kind of girl who fit in, I wouldn't have had to work so hard just to be average, right? Anyway, however remote my chances of someone so gorgeous paying any attention to someone like me, I couldn't get him out of my mind. Which is how I ended up at the local library behind a stack of, you guessed it, vampire books, hoping no one would see me. Not that it mattered, see above. Seeing me at the library wouldn't damage my reputation, and if we're going to do true confessions, I actually went there pretty often. Where do you think the girls who aren't cheerleaders and class presidents hang out anyway? I learned a lot. I even took some notes. It was pretty fascinating stuff if you like that sort of thing. Of course, everybody knows I have a weak stomach, but love makes you strong, right? So I read about vampires being afraid of garlic, and vampires not having any mirror images, and killing vampires by driving stakes through their hearts, and vampires frying in the cruel, cruel sunrise. It was pretty gruesome. Stupid, but gruesome. Except that none of the authorities really agreed. I found myself mentally echoing Val's words to Delia. So who made you an expert on vampires anyway? Ken. I caught myself doing all the stupid things I swore I'd never do. Writing his name in my notebook. Writing my name in his. Making anagrams of his name and mine. Elizabeth and Ken. Why not? It certainly sounded as good as Barbie and Ken. Ken, on the other hand, wasn't wasting any time doodling. He started dating Liz. She probably promised to teach him all her cheers. I'd seen them in the corner during lunch, practically locking lips. Of course, it ruined my appetite. Not that I'm a big eater, but what does it matter? It's the thought that counts, right? But it didn't last. One day they were a my locker or yours couple. The next day they were looking in opposite directions when they passed. Liz wouldn't talk about it. The rumor started up again. Nonsense, said Delia, but she had the light of a different kind of battle in her eye. He goes out in the daylight, doesn't he? Vampires can't go out in the sun? Maybe they can when they're young, argued Val. I looked at Val with new respect. Besides, Liz is wearing a turtleneck. Now Delia was looking at Val. You're from outer space, you know that? Maybe I am, said Val. So I should get along just fine with a vampire. She wafted away, leaving me and Delia standing there. I said to distract her. Maybe he is a very young vampire, like Young Frankenstein, the movie? Elizabeth, said Delia, you're getting as bad as Val? And she walked away in the other direction. So I had time on my hands, and I went to math early and grabbed a seat in the back as usual, but it was a better than usual seat, because he always sat in the same place in the room, the back corner, and this time I was sitting one desk away. It was the darkest corner, come to think of it. He came in with Louise Morale on his arm. She was looking up at him. He was looking down at her. It was sickening, and she got a better seat right in front of him. They flirted all through math, not that I watched them, but I couldn't help but notice one thing. Louise got out her mirror at the end of class to study her perfect face. She frowned a little, and at about the same time Ken jumped up. Coming, he murmured. Oh God, it was sexy. Louise frowned just a little more, then remembered that frowning was not in the most beautiful, most popular handbook, and stopped. She jumped up and reattached herself to him, and they went out hip to hip. Coming, I sneered to myself, and looked up to see Mad Math McGee looking at me. Teachers, you have to watch them every minute. Going, I said more loudly, and gathered up my books, hurried out of class before he could ask if anything was wrong. Did I need help? What about a parent-teacher conference? My parents wouldn't come. I could explain it all to them, no problem. But what's the point of borrowing trouble, as my mother would say? Besides, just imagine how puzzled they'd be. But she's never given us a minute's trouble, my mother would say earnestly. She's always been such a good girl. My father would look hurt, bewildered. I remembered when my mother had tried to have her little girl-to-girl talk to me about things. She never did get around to defining things, and the questions I had probably weren't in her definition anyway. I mean, imagine me asking her how you could tell if someone was really a vampire and what you would do to get him to fall in love with you. Besides, if things, like my mother imagined, ever came up, I could always ask Delia. But getting back to other things, Ken and Louise lasted through several very nice weekends. The sort of weekends where we go to football games and parties and parking at least in our town. We're so all-American it could make you sick, but I wanted more than anything to be a part of that, and not with Delia and Val, with Ken, who, if anything, was getting more pale and romantic and interesting and gorgeous. Delia and Val, of course, kept talking about him, watching him, but what had once been a pleasure was now a pain. I was afraid I'd give myself away, but I couldn't not talk about Ken, the most perfect guy I'd ever seen, because even if Val did miss that little distinction, Delia would catch on and make my life miserable, and whatever else Delia was, I wanted her on my side, because if Delia decided you were a potential gossip victim, then that was the end of your social life forever. You were outside the pale. You might as well really be a vampire. When Ken and Louise broke up, Delia broke in. One minute we were standing in the hall arguing about guess who being guess what, and the next, she was cutting across the traffic and planting herself firmly in front of him. He smiled down at her, a neat, tight-lipped little curl of the mouth, and I felt my heart take a dive. He's definitely a vampire, said Val. You won't know until you wear some garlic around him, I said without thinking. How can you think when your heart is breaking? Eat garlic and die, Delia. My broken heart was thumping out in my chest. Well, don't tell Delia, said Val in an aggrieved tone. Let him just rip her throat out for all I care. Val, I exclaimed, surprised by her vehemence. The next night, against my better judgment, I let Colin Harper take me to a horror movie. I thought I was going to throw up. It was so crude. All that spurting blood and ripping flesh and vampires turning into bats. Please, give me a break. I know. I'm supposed to shriek and bury my face in Colin's manly shoulder. But suppose I poked my eye out on that collection of pens he carried in his pocket. I just couldn't do it. I let him squeeze his hot hand around my cold one, but when the movie was over, I said, I have a weak stomach, Colin. I'm sorry, but you'll have to take me home. Of course, it didn't help seeing Delia and Ken on the way out. Delia didn't see me. She had her head thrown back, laughing. She was wearing something very un-Delia-like, low cut, so with her head back, she was practically offering Ken her whole neck. Everything started swimming around in front of me. It was so unfair. Take me home now, I told poor Colin, and that was that. What happened between Ken and Delia? No one knows. One day she appeared at school, a major scarf tied around her neck. He got you, gasped Val. Don't be ridiculous, snapped Delia. It's just an act. Why do you have that scarf on then? Why does anyone wear a scarf after a date, Val? Think. Val thought. She got really wide-eyed and went, Oh. He's a creep, said Delia. He dumped you, didn't he? Said Val. Why? Oh, shut up, said Delia, and turned on her heel and stomped away. He's such a gentleman, cooed Val. What? I said. What are you talking about? He never talks about the girls he goes out with. Don't you think that is awfully polite? I think he was a pig if he did, I said. Val giggled. Not pig, silly. Vampire. Val was his next victim. I just couldn't figure it out. Liz wasn't talking. Louise wasn't talking. Delia wouldn't say anything. The rumors were still flying, but they were mostly old stuff now. Was he or wasn't he a vampire? With Delia sulking and Val busy, I had plenty of free time, so I went back to the library and found out a lot more interesting stuff, including the fact that it took more than one bite, some people believed, to turn you into a vampire. Of course, there was the one bite school too, and the all-in how he bit you school, which I thought of as the vampire's kiss school, the kiss that made you his forever. Naturally, no one talked about how a vampire kissed a vampire. When you've never been kissed, you think about it a lot, right? Like, what did they do with their teeth? Was it like wearing glasses or having braces? Could a vampire write to Ann Landers about it, anonymously, of course? I giggled, then sobered up. Was Ken just feeding off his victims, or was he testing them somehow? Looking, maybe, for his one true love, the girl who would be willing to... Oh, Ken, I thought to myself, you just haven't kissed the right girl. You're sick, I said to myself aloud. Shh, said someone else, so I gathered up the books, and that's when I noticed it. Val. Val's name was on all those books, too. She'd checked them out. Val, class space cadet, had actually checked out and possibly read not one, but many books on vampires. Calm down, I thought. I mean, how is anyone supposed to know anything about vampires if they don't look it up, even if no one seems to know the truth? But Val? The next few weeks were interesting. Val showed up right away with a scarf and a turtleneck, but she didn't look pale. If anything, she looked rosy, glowing, positively full of life, or life's blood. It was Ken who looked paler and paler. He even seemed to recoil a bit when Val came toward him. Had he made her a vampire? Had he created a monster? Have some pizza, I said to Val one day. I'd secretly loaded it with garlic. She said, scarfing, if you'll excuse the expression, it all down. So either she wasn't a vampire, or two more vampire laws were proven false. Vampires hate garlic, and vampires can only eat blood. Whatever it was killing my appetite. I pushed my pizza away. Val snatched it right up. You never eat, she said happily. Your poor weak stomach. And then over Thanksgiving, they broke up. Val drifted back into our threesome, vague as ever. She wasn't wearing a scarf or turtleneck. I inspected her neck as closely as I dared. It looked fine. What happened? I asked as Delia glared. He's not... She let her words slide off. Not a vampire? I asked. Val sighed. I don't want to talk about it, she said, in a long, suffering way that made me want to throttle her, but it wouldn't do any good. I knew it was the last I'd get out of Val. So I did what any red-blooded all-American girl would do. At least, I think I did. I mean, I don't know the rules, and who could I ask? What I did was ask Ken, basically. I just sort of threw myself at him. I waited for him by his locker. Hi, I croaked, leaning against it, holding my books up in front of my chest as if I had something to hide. Hello. He smiled, a little. Elizabeth, I said. Not Liz, not Beth, just Elizabeth. Hello, Elizabeth, he said. I stared as hypnotically as I could into his eyes. For some reason, it worked. So, just Elizabeth, what are you doing Saturday night? For my date, I went for a more sophisticated look. It's one I actually feel more comfortable in, but I think he was a little startled at the radical departure from my usual pastels all over. But if you're going to date a vampire, I think you should dress the part. Of course, I didn't invite him to meet my parents. I couldn't. They look at me, they look at him. What would they think? Our little girl is what they'd think. After all we've done, where did we go wrong? And what could I tell them? So I slipped out for my date with an alleged vampire with a quick, guilty goodbye, and my heart breaking and racing at the same time. I guess that is true love, isn't it? Wow, he said, after he got used to my new look. I could feel his eyes on the low-cut, square neck of my basic black dress. My mother's actually, but she wasn't using it, and what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. We went to a horror flick, and I screamed and buried my face in his shirt. It felt so good. I imagined kissing him, and I could almost taste it. I held his hand so tightly, and that was hot too. It felt as if his hand was on fire, like dry ice. We drove up to the point where everyone of every generation has gone parking since the town was founded. I told you we were in all-American town. He stopped the car and turned out the lights. He began to trace the edge of the neck of my dress with one finger. No other touching, just that. I shivered. Cold? He asked, smiling. I saw a milli flash of white teeth in the dark. I shook my head. Scared? He asked, leaning closer. I shook my head again. I leaned back. Ken, I said softly. Ken, tell me, is what they say true? The flash of white teeth again. What do they say? That you're a vampire. He laughed softly, deliciously. What do you think? He leaned over, paused. I waited. His breath touched my throat. Then I felt it. The sharp pinch, the needle point of teeth on my neck. A schoolboy nibble, the kind that goes with parked cars and steamy windows. Nothing more. When he was finished, he leaned back. I was shaking. I was so ashamed. I felt like such a fool in my Vamp the Vampire clothes. I practically told him I thought he was really and truly a vampire. Oh, God, I wished I was dead. Well, he said. I think all I have here is a world-class hickey, I said as neutrally as I could. I mean, I would have been lying if I'd said it was what I had expected, that I wasn't disappointed. He started to laugh. Don't, I said, holding out my hand, as if I could push away my embarrassment. He grasped my hand and began to nibble on each finger, and suddenly my courage came back. Sometimes you just have to take a chance, right? What about Liz? I said almost to myself. Louise? Delia? Were you just teasing them, pretending, leading them on? Did you give them a good sharp bite and a little scare, so they felt like fools for believing you? The nibbling stopped. I could feel him staring at me, but I didn't look. I stared into the darkness as I went on. And Val, was she a wild card? Did she take you up on it, and then leave you because you weren't what she wanted you to be? His breath suddenly felt hot, but my hand stayed icy cold. Well, well, he said, there's more to you than meets the eye, just Elizabeth. Is that how it was? I persisted. A bad joke? Tell me the truth. He watched me for a long, long moment. I could hear him breathing. I could hear me breathing. It wasn't like in the movies at all. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a voice I hadn't heard before. Soft, eerily beautiful. They thought that it was a fun game. It made them sexy to be able to say they'd once dated a vampire. But when I got serious, they got angry. Them, angry. As if by being what they wanted me to be, I'd betrayed them. As if I was using them. As if I was the perverse one. Val? I breathed. My hands were suddenly freezing against his lips. The glint of teeth again. Val. Oh, she wanted to play. She loved it. A nibble here, a nibble there. She was almost inhuman the way she teased me, led me on, and everyone envied me for being with Val. He paused, then went on smoothly, expressionless. In the end, I quit. Not Val. His voice changed. So, what now, just Elizabeth? He was mocking me now, but it was okay. I understood. I knew the real truth, and I loved him all the more for it. I would love him forever. You? I hesitated a moment longer. Surely he could hear my heart. Surely he could see it beating. You really are a vampire? I looked up then into his eyes. They burned suddenly red, red as blood rubies in the dark. I saw it in the night that is never dark for those like him, like me. I felt my own eyes flame red with joy and promise and relief and hope for the future as I looked back into his. He tilted his head back, half closed his glittering eyes. I leaned forward tentatively. I felt him stiffen as my breath touched his neck. I felt his pulse beneath my lips. I felt his skin yield, just a little. I stopped. I'd been clumsy. A thin trickle of blood slid down his pale throat. But he touched the shining track of blood, then reached out and touched my lips. I leaned forward again. I opened my mouth over the blood, and it was as if I were taking a deep, deep breath for the first time, sucking, feeling its salt sweetness beneath my teeth, against my tongue. I heard him sigh, and then I heard him whisper, yes, yes. I sat up slowly. Slowly, I tilted my own head back, imagining my neck pale and smooth. He smiled at me, a real smile. I smiled at him as he pulled me close. Give me a kiss, I said. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Death's Kiss by D.E. Athkins. Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and thank you very much for joining me for my production of Blood Kiss by D.E. Athkins. I have not read D.E. Athkins before. I like the visual style, and I like how Ken got paler and paler with the more victims he claimed. In the end, it wasn't just some weird school rumor, it was true. He was actually a vampire, and all the girls that dated Ken were so afraid of being teased that they didn't say anything about it. They just said, yeah, we got hickeys, that's it. That's what you do on a date, you get hickeys, and that's why I'm wearing a turtleneck and a scarf, because they're totally covering up for it. This was a fun read. I like doing these short stories. They get me out of my comfort zone, and they force me to adjust to new ways of reading and new ways of doing the voices, and I wouldn't mind reading more D.E. Athkins in the future. So what should I read next? I don't know. Please send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the join button to show your support. Any help is greatly appreciated. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales of horror. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.